Hi, I'm Soumya Gupta, and welcome to the Data Decoded podcast. In every episode, we feature trailblazers who are reshaping the data landscape, leaders from technology, industry veterans, compliance specialists, and the innovators working behind the scenes. Tune in to learn from the lessons of the past, act with clarity today so we can responsibly prepare the data of tomorrow. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another brand new episode of Data Decoded, where you speak your legacy. Today we have a very special guest, David, on our episode. Hi, David.
Hello, hi everyone. Hi Samir.
Hi, David. So, David is a proud father. He works in IT, delivering front end solutions for right now for one of the biggest banks of Australia. And he sits at the perfect intersection of industry and technology, where he does understand industry problems, works with multiple stakeholders, and is also delivering technology and more recently generative AI solutions to solve the big problems of banks. Yeah. Now, the when I was talking to David on what is his theory in life, he says that you have to trust the path, you have to keep going, and you have to make it right. So, what exactly happened, David, in your career that made you shift your ideology and made it so firm today?
Oh yeah. So 6 years ago, it's probably like a very interesting turning point. Everything was going pretty well. I was been exploring a number of different things, data science, but also on the operation management side of things as well. So not purely technical. But around about that time, actually, there was a restructure in the company. I lost my job. Didn't expect it. And I thought, well, I'll find a
Okay.
job pretty easily, but it ended up taking me a lot longer. It took me 6 months. So that was pretty tough. At the same time, I was doing a master degree in data science as well, where I actually met some really smart kids, and the combination of those kind of made me realize that, well, actually, I'm not as smart as I thought I would be. I'm not as good as I thought it would be, but I've got two kids, and in life, there's a lot of things that I need to carry on. So I start to shift my focus from that point onwards. And interesting enough, that actually allowed me to focus a lot better on what interests me, and my career has actually since sort of taken off since then. It's been a very interesting, life changing experience. Not in a way that I wanted it to start with, but if I look back, I think that's probably one of the best things that ever happened to me.
But you love what you do now, right?
Yeah, I always love technology, but my angle is more around the actual delivery side of things, because technology is so broad, it's so big, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to specialize in data delivery, and I'm going to try to use delivery as a way to help others to get better educated with data. So that's been my two main focus.
Yep. Perfect. So today, after discussing about what 7 to 8 topics, we finally agreed on one topic that we can talk about today, at least for today's episode. And today we are talking about centralized versus decentralized architectures and how we have moved from being from all our data architectures to be centralized before COVID times to how it is getting now and how it's getting more domain centric and how it's getting more customized and the pros and cons of it, of course, they'll always be. So, in my opinion, right, when I started looking, so I have not honestly seen that much decentralization with respect to with respect to individual modules of a system, because because it is difficult, right? Because there's this role of the chief data officer, right, which has recently emerged, and there is where the entire authority has to lie with that one person or with that one um, LOB, maybe line of business, and then it becomes difficult to really match the governance of all the different other domains, and that's where the whole mesh and fabric things come in. So it is difficult to implement, but yes, of course, it's the best of both worlds if you can really implement. Uh, if you can really implement centralization on top of decentralized modules, so a common augmented governance on top of individualized data sets. So yeah, how have you seen the difference so far, Dave?
Um, you mentioned about fabric, right? So I just want to so we clarify on that point because when we initially
Yep.
talk about fabric, so I'm a Microsoft MVP, and when you originally talked to me about fabric, my head went directly into Microsoft Fabric, but that's not quite the
Yep.
fabric that you're talking about, right? Do you want to a little bit about
Yep.
when you say fabric?
I'm talking about the data fabric architecture versus data mesh. Like when it, so mesh, right?
Yeah,
Like we know, it is about particular modules, it's about particular domains having their own data sets, and that's what the mesh architecture is about. But the cons to it is that the governance is not centralized, authorization is a problem, and stuff like that. There is technology integrations required at a global and local level, which causes
yeah,
an issue. Whereas fabric stands at a different concept, that it has to bring, it's all about generalizing it, and mesh is all about making it more specific. So here we are more talking about the architecture, and we're
yeah,
not talking about Microsoft
yeah.
Fabric as such. So
Sure.
yeah.
Just to emphasize the point that I always sit in the front end delivery. I work with business throughout my career, and that's where my passion is. So I
Mhm.
experience the centralized versus decentralized uh, change in a very like hands-on way, and the difference is huge. When a lot of organizations want to get the best of both worlds, I don't think that's actually achievable because in reality that if you want control, obviously, you will centralize. If you want to increase productivity for the business, you try to go with decentralized. But in that process, you will lose control, right? There's no question about it. Whereas
Yep.
if people want to have both, that's where it really complicates things. And as you mentioned, there's the chief data officer, and depending on different chief data officer have different approach towards it as well. Some would want to have a more centralized way, and then others might want to lean towards a more business centric or a decentralized method as well. Yeah, in terms of when I work with the business that's centralized, my productivity is more than halved. You know, it's so hard to
Okay.
get access to data that I need. It's so hard
Exactly.
to make changes to data assets in a way that I need. It just takes a lot of time, lots of meetings. Whereas in the decentralized world, the business can dictate a lot of things. There's often no approval required, or sometimes there's one level of approval that's required to actually create the data
Mhm.
asset that's meaningful to the business. So we're talking about, when you look at a project, the difference is often between maybe like 2 to 3 weeks in the decentralized world versus 3 to 6 months in the centralized world. So that's the kind of difference we're talking about in the actual delivery side of things. Yeah.
Implementations.
But it's not perfect, right? Like, decentralized model is far from perfect. You run into all sort of data quality problems, data security issues. I work in a bank; it's a highly regulated industry, so there's
Mhm.
actually a lot of risk associated with decentralization. So finding that sweet spot is quite important.
Yep, yep. But I think it's working for the better, considering that there is this rise of another term called data products, which you are mentioning as data assets, where if we have, let's say, the investment banking side of business, we have corporate banking, we have marketing, all of them can work with their own data products, and they can own the responsibility of the asset itself, of the
Yeah,
access of course, and whatever changes or whatever reports that they want to make, and they can completely own that responsibility. So in that sense, it is kind of helpful, considering that the productivity is really increased, and it leads to more, like the data that we are also ingesting and that we are maintaining, the quality that we actually need for that particular business, or that particular analysis, and the minimum standard quality that we need, we can all maintain that. So it's not necessary that for, let's say, credit risk versus for for marketing, if I want to if I want to have some fields, I might not want the same fields every time. So like for different domains, the kind of data elements that they require can be managed in that way. It can be leveraged in a different manner, right?
yeah, definitely. So the business has a lot more say in what's important for them, what's not
Mm-hmm.
important for them. They don't need to explain to somebody who, coming purely from a technical perspective, doesn't understand the business.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, it's definitely helpful in that way. You did mention about the word responsibility, which is
Mm-hmm.
in theory, when you decentralize, you assume that the line of business will actually take ownership and responsibility of their own data sets in that domain. But when you roll it out in a kind of largish organization, you will find the, the, uh, the expertise in different business areas often varies a lot. You have
Right,
some
right.
line of business that doing a fantastic job. Metadata is clean,
Mm-hmm.
everything is documented properly, clear data
Mm-hmm.
flows, versus other line of business where you will struggle to actually find the owner for nobody want to take
Mm-hmm.
responsibility over things that they don't understand. So yeah, that.
Yep.
I think that's probably one of the biggest challenge for organization when they try to implement data mesh. Like for example, I've worked with a lot of HR teams, and data technology hasn't been their strong strengths in the past. And yeah, generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking, there's often a lack of care in that space.
Right, right. How are you seeing generative AI contribute to this?
Um, Generative AI contribute to the solution or the problem? Because it does contribute to both, right? Uh,
Let's talk about the
yeah,
problem
look,
first.
over the past 10 years, in the old days, you have a data team that controls the data warehouse, and Tableau comes along. Business can use, other than Excel, they can actually use a proper like visualization tool, like a self-service kind of visualization tool. And then you have Power
Mm-hmm.
BI, and a mix of different technologies that's self-service. Self-service means
Mm-hmm.
business can actually use those tools to achieve their requirements without going through the technology team or the data team. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
recently, Gen AI has really taken that to the next level. So for uh, technology, like centralized technology or data teams, they want to enforce any
Mm-hmm.
level of control. Gen AI has actually made it a lot harder for them because people used to have to come to a central data team for certain things, and now they can just go through Gen AI, get the answer much faster. So yeah, I think it doesn't help when you want to have certain conversation around governance, around risk control. The central team will struggle to find the audience.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the that leads to that LLM discussion that we were trying to have the other day, that how privately created and trained LLMs can actually counter in the ways of governance and access control and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And now let's talk about the solution. How do you think Gen AI is helping out with the decentralization and creating mesh on top of fabrics?
Um, I think before we look at like the actual use of large language model on that specific problem, I think there are a lot of other solutions that's quite critical. Maybe I'll take a step back if that's okay, just to break
Sure.
break down the actual data mesh concept. Uh, right. So as you mentioned, data mesh allows different part of the business to create their own data products. Right. So you can have a retail data set. You can have a like a customer, HR,
Corporate
corporate
banking,
marketing,
marketing.
etc. So you have all these segmented domains, and you want to try to, and sometimes like the source data is actually from different platforms as well. It could be SAP for certain things, Oracle for others, IBM, etc. There's like so many different uh, way to capture the data in the first place. And so you have these domains that link to the source, and then they create their own like business products out of the data they have. Then they will try to someone central will want to actually link them together, so you have another layer on top of everything as well. So in data mesh, there's domain, there's subdomain, and there's the data products throughout different layer. So that's how decentralized is kind of achieved. One of the very big problem with decentralized is, as we mentioned before, the control side of things. How do we then collect the data? The bigger problem is how do we then share the data? Let's say customer data. There's a lot of sensitive information in there. So how do you ensure that like data doesn't get leaked when you have different platforms? When you transition, let's say the source data is in SAP, and it's at some point in transition into a data warehouse in Azure. How do you then make sure that the people who's got access to SAP will still have access to Azure, but no one else will have access to the customer data? So there's a lot of very tricky problems when you do cross-platform transitions. So, but there are a lot of technologies out there that help to solve that exact problem as well. And yeah, so I guess to a certain degree, the easiest way to solve is to reduce the number of platform transitions, try to keep everything
Of course. Of
in a
course.
relatively like specific technology.
Can we let's see if there is an organization that's currently following a centralized data model approach, and if they are moving towards decentralization, maybe let's try to break down the steps for them, right? What do you think can be like the go-to strategy that they can use? So on the implementation side, what are some architectures that you recommend, or that we can go around with when we are doing this decoupling from centralized to decentralized?
Yeah, there's the medallion architecture, and there's like different flavor of that. Basically, in that
Right.
structure, you have three layers. You have a bronze layer, you have a silver layer, and you have a gold layer. So the bronze layer will actually contain raw format of data, typically in a data lake kind of scenario. You get all the data into that layer, or you create shortcuts with connections to the data sources. Once you've got that, like all the information, all the different data assets, you need to create the silver layer. Silver layer is where I'd say most of the hard work actually take place. You need to deduplicate, transform, cleanse the data. So there's a lot of things to get the data into a ready to consume, ready to use kind of format. And then you have the gold layer where it then just we talked about KPI before. So every KPI, when you start to break it down, there's multiple layer of data logic as well. So those can be aggregated in the golden layer, and so
Yeah.
it's ready for consumption by different parts of the business or leadership team. So that's
Yeah, and the interoperability can stay with the gold layer of all the meshes that we have created across,
yeah,
right?
it will be once it's got you can once you achieve the gold layer in one of the mesh, imagine that you have multiple gold layers from different mesh domains. You can then have another layer on top of that to consume the data that's from different area that's ready to be consumed.
Yep. Okay.
Well,
Okay.
naming is
What
quite
else?
different, right? So I use medallic architecture, but there's different way of naming the different layers. Sometimes you get three layers, sometimes you get five layer, and sometimes you get like a
Yep.
data
Yep.
management layer and a data security layer on top as well. So just different flavor of like basically the same thing.
This terminology, yeah, it's more on. See, we will need governance whether you make it as a part of the process or you make it as a part of the ingestion of data as such, or you make it as a part of the end user layer, like interfacing layer. But however, it also depends on from where the data is actually getting accessed. Is it getting accessed from the end user, or is it getting accessed in the middle? So the governance can, change from which from where do you want to start safeguarding,
Yeah,
basically,
yeah,
right?
definitely.
All right, David. So let's talk about in Australia. We have started seeing a lot of work happening around ESG data products, even with respect to banks, right? For environment and sustainability reporting, we have started having different sorts of reports and a different like the data sources that are coming have been brought into the system recently. And so, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a very good use case for data mesh, and because it's a relatively new like a reporting requirement for a lot of large organizations in Australia, and a lot of organizations are actually struggling to come up with a proper solution, and that's where the data mesh kind of architecture is actually quite handy, because when you look at environmental and sustainability report, you're not looking at a particular domain. You're typically looking at cross domains. You'll be looking at finance data. You'll be looking at property data. You'll be looking at certain employee activity related data, and utility stuff as well. So it's pretty broad. And if, let's say, in an ideal world, the finance data is ready to be consumed, the golden layer has already been achieved. So if I'm someone who is asked to deliver the actual solution, so I can easily kind of just tap in to the finance data to get spend related information. I can tap into the property data to understand utility consumption, tap into like business travel data to understand what flights, car rental, etc. Has taken place over a period. But then at the same time, there's also like new data elements that needs to be brought in from external as well. So, for example, one of the very common approach is to categorize the spend for organization into different categories, and then each category will have a conversion rate. So if you spend $1 million on IT infrastructure, there will be a conversion rate into carbon emission, for example. And so those kind of conversion data typically come from an external source. So again, if I'm the person who's delivering this, um, there hopefully will be a API available for the new data source that I can then tap into to bring the data into whether a data lake or a SQL database or a data warehouse kind of environment, to again build it up into a silver layer, to be ready to be consumed by my own reports. So once I've created the conversion calculation about emissions, then I can start to construct that golden layer, so that then can be used for all kind of purposes as well. So I think that's actually a really good example, and that's a good question.
All right. So, also, right, because this is, we are talking about it from a data mesh standpoint that it is implemented, I think it has made it easier also to accommodate, because it gives you that flexibility, right? It doesn't disrupt the entire system. And even just like there's an ESG use case that has come up, if there's something else, then it can rely on its own data providers, it can rely on its own processing and its own analytics and reporting,
Yeah. There
right?
are also external organizations that kind of specialize in this area as well, and some organizations will actually
Uh-huh.
take will extract the data in a particular format and feed it to the external provider to do their thing as well. So like there's different ways to approaching
Right.
it, but having a good data governance framework, and having a data mesh um, properly implemented will definitely help to speed things up to achieve better outcome.
Yep, yep. And do you have anything to say about how governance can really, like, because we're talking about data mesh right now, and that means that governance has to be applied on a more global level. So what are normally the challenges and the methodologies that are implemented to make sure that it's decentralized yet centralized?
Yeah, that's the hardest thing, really. Once you decentralize it, how do you then bring bring the governance back? Hopefully you've already actually set up the governance in the first place, so you already
Yeah.
have some level of control. There are different tools. When we look at that control layer, we're talking about data quality. We're talking about data access management, talking about data security. I think that's probably like the three big things on top of my head. And um, data quality, how do you make sure, how do you ensure that's being properly implemented? How do you validate the data product against? You need some kind of internal testing mechanism, and that's one of the area that I don't see enough in most organizations that try to implement some level of data mesh. When you do full stack development, for example, you will set up test cases upfront, right? Okay, I've got a function, this is what I need to test against, but it doesn't quite work that way in the data world. So data quality is a huge issue, and unfortunately there's not a very good technical solution for data quality management. So the next thing we often concern is access management control.
Yep.
User access management.
Yep.
Um, it's very process driven. So and there are a lot of vendors out there that can do that. You have single sign on. that allows the user to kind of keep their credential across different platforms. So the technology team can at least try to maintain that at some level. But sometimes, people move around in the organization, so there's a challenge around, keeping the current information up to date in different systems. So that requires a lot of work. You can automate as much as you want, but there's often special cases where it falls outside of the every system will have different loopholes, and you always have people fall into certain loopholes. So it's it's another challenge that is again, it's not a purely technical kind of solution. So you need, yeah,
Yep.
a lot of management layer and monitoring on top, and then data security. uh, Look, data security at the fundamental layer is about labeling data sets, labeling columns, and that requires understanding of the data. And I actually think that's one area that data mesh allows organization to achieve better than a centralized model, because people from the business, they have much better knowledge of the data set. And if they are properly encouraged and engaged to do the labeling, that's a huge
That kind of becomes mandatory also for mesh, etc., right? That you have to do cataloging and you have to classify and clean it
yeah.
up. And so that's the best part of having it at the golden level. And if the interoperability happens from the golden layer, I think a lot of those problems get solved.
Yeah, like it. Sometimes it happens at the golden layer, but sometimes it might actually need to happen at a, yeah,
From the raws.
from a lower level as well, because you don't know. Like
Yeah.
for example, you use ESG reporting again. Um, Even though there's a golden layer, but there might be certain data columns that I need for this new requirement that's actually not in golden layer. So I might need to request access for silver layer. So it would be better if the identifier is in place at the lower level, and when it gets aggregated, you need to find a way to actually keep those identifiers as well. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's not things that get people excited as well. It's not something that you can show the management team, hey, look at this fantastic job I've done with data labeling. Um, you know,
Right, right. But yeah, organization needs that set of job to be done anyway, right? If we are talking about organizing or reorganizing,
yeah.
for that matter, right? All right, David. I think we are at the top of the hour, and we had a great discussion right now. Wonderful conversation. I'm so glad you could take out time on a Saturday to do this discussion with me. What are your plans for the day later?
Well, it's I'm in Australia, so it's 10 p.m. on a Saturday. I will probably have a drink after this. I've got a fridge in my garage. That's another cool thing about the garage. So
Okay.
I hope I haven't run out of beer as yet, but that's probably what I'll be doing. Because my job is done, whereas part of your job is kind of beginning now. We finished the
Beginning.
recording. There'll be more work for you. And you mentioned that you want to
Yep.
do a fair bit of work today as well. Um,
Yep. Yep. So it's just beginning in Singapore. It's 6 p.m. now,
okay.
7 p.m. So yeah,
All right. All the
I'll be
best.
fine.
Yeah.
All right, David. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I'm very sure the 7, 8 topics that we have identified, I will come back to you for
Yeah.
another
Looking
episode
forward to that.
to
It's been a
discuss
great
more.
chat to you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who have joined us from different parts of the world. Have a good day and tune in for the next episode of Data Decoded. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.